The unwanted betrothal. The sun had barely risen, casting a pale golden light across the small village. In a modest home, a young girl named Asha stood by the window, her eyes staring out at the mist that enveloped the fields. She didn't want to be here, not today, not in this moment, when her heart felt heavy with dread. The weight of the day's events was pressing down on her chest, and there was nothing she could do to escape it. Asha was no stranger to hard work. She had grown up in a family struggling to make ends meet, but today was different. Today, her family was selling her future. The man her father had promised her to had arrived earlier in the morning, his figure imposing as he stood in the doorway, waiting for the deal to be sealed. She could hear the voices of her parents downstairs, arguing in hushed tones about the debt they owed. It had all come down to this. The man, a wealthy landowner from a distant village, had agreed to marry her, but not out of love now. It was a transaction, a way to pay off her family's debts. She had no say in the matter. The thought of it made her stomach churn, and her hands trembled as she stood frozen in place. The life she had known, the quiet, peaceful life with her family, was about to end, and a future she didn't choose was being thrust upon her. Her mother, who had once been full of warmth and laughter, now looked like a stranger to her. The worry lines on her face had deepened over the past few months as the family's debts piled higher and higher. There was no escape. And yet, Asha still clung to the hope that somehow something might change. But deep down, she knew better. Her fate had been sealed long before she had any chance to make her own decisions. Asha had always been quiet, observant. She had seen how her family struggled, how her mother worked tirelessly to make ends meet, and how her father had tried unsuccessfully find a way out of their financial troubles. But now, it had come to this. Her father had sold her future to a stranger in order to lift the burden off their shoulders. She looked at herself in the mirror. The girl staring back at her seemed like a stranger too. Her long, dark hair cascaded down her back, and her brown eyes were wide with fear. She barely recognized herself. The wedding dress her mother had sewn for her was laid out on the bed, delicate and white, but it felt like an iron chain that would bind her to a life she didn't want. As she dressed in silence, her mind raced with thoughts of escape, of running away, of refusing to go through with the marriage. But she knew that wasn't an option. Her family depended on her, and they had already made the deal. The money had already been exchanged. There was no turning back. Her heart ached as she pulled on the dress. It was beautiful, but it felt like a prison. She didn't want to marry a man she didn't love, and she didn't want to be the solution to her family's problems. But what could she do? She was trapped in a world where her choices didn't matter. Downstairs, the man waited, his face stern and unreadable. Asha had seen him briefly when he had arrived earlier. He had a look of someone who was used to getting what he wanted. She didn't know what he saw in her, but she knew one thing for sure: he didn't see her as a person. To him, she was a means to an end. Her father called her name, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was time. She took a deep breath and walked down the stairs, her feet heavy as they moved over the floorboards. The sound of her steps echoed in the quiet house, and for a moment she wondered if she could turn back, if she could run. But she knew better than to try. The man stood as she entered the room, his cold eyes scanning her from head to toe. "She's more beautiful than I thought," he said, his voice flat. He didn't sound impressed, but it wasn't anger or disdain that filled his tone. It was indifference. That was worse, Asha thought. Indifference meant she didn't matter. Her father nodded, a look of relief on his face. "It's done, Asha. This is the best for us. You'll be taken care of." Asha's heart sank. She wanted to scream, to tell them how wrong this all was, but the words didn't come. Instead, she stood there, silent, and accepted the life that was being handed to her. Her hands clenched at her sides, but there was no fighting back. She had no choice. The man stepped forward, and without a word, he took her hand, leading her outside to the waiting carriage. Her parents stood behind her, watching as she was taken away. Asha didn't look back. "She'll see OULDN, single quotes, as the carriage began to roll away. Asha pressed her face against the cold glass, her breath fogging up the window. The world she had known was disappearing. The life she had dreamed of, one where she could choose her own future, was slipping away from her grasp. But in the silence, something stirred deep within her, her feeling she couldn't name. Maybe it was hope, maybe it was defiance, or maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of a new story, one that she had yet to write. The stranger's offer. The sun had barely set, casting long shadows across the land as the carriage jolted over the uneven road. Asha sat quietly in the corner, staring out of the window, her thoughts a whirlwind of confusion, anger, and fear. The vast fields passed by in silence, stretching on endlessly. Every mile felt like a chain tightening around her chest, and every bump in the road reminded her that she was being pulled further away from everything she had known. The promise of a new life, one that wasn't hers to choose, felt more like a prison with each passing moment. The man who had arranged her marriage sat across from her in the carriage, silent as well. His name was Rajan, a man of few words and colder gestures. Asha had barely spoken to him, but she knew enough to understand that he was a man driven by power and wealth, not emotions or empathy. To him, she was just another asset, another piece. In the game of life, his indifference to her pain was unbearable, yet she remained silent, her voice trapped somewhere deep inside her. The world outside the window was fading into twilight, and with it, the last flicker of hope Asha had been clinging to. There was no escape, or so she thought. It was then, as the carriage reached a small crossroads near a quiet river, that something unexpected happened. A figure appeared in the distance, shrouded in the evening mist, moving with purpose. Asha squinted through the fog, trying to make out the figure. A man, she thought, but something about him seemed different. His movements were fluid, almost like he wasn't entirely part of the world around him. The carriage slowed as they approached, and Asha's curiosity piqued. The man stepped forward, his face hidden beneath the shadow of a hood, but his presence was undeniable. The driver hesitated, unsure of whether to proceed or stop. Rajan, sitting across from Asha, frowned at the sight of the stranger, his sharp eyes scanning the road. "Who is that?" Asha whispered, though her voice barely reached the driver. The driver remained silent, his eyes fixed on the stranger. But before any of them could react, the man stepped forward and knocked on the carriage door. His knock was firm, yet not threatening. A call for attention. Rajan's hand tightened on the reins, and he opened the door just a crack. The stranger's voice, low but clear, echoed in the quiet night. "I have an offer for you," he said, his gaze shifting to Asha, for her. Rajan looked the man up and down, suspicion clear on his face. "What do you want?" "I can offer her a way out," the stranger continued, his voice steady, unwavering. "A way out of this marriage, a way out of this life. If you let her go, I'll pay the debt you owe, every last coin." Asha's heart skipped a beat. and for the first time since the day had begun, she felt a spark of hope. She leaned forward, trying to make sense of what the man was saying. Could it be true? Could there really be a way out? Rajan narrowed his eyes, his grip tightening on the door handle. You think I'll just let her go? After everything I've done to secure this marriage? The stranger nodded slowly, his expression calm. You have your debts. I have my ways of settling them. But the girl, she should not be forced into this life. She deserves more than this. Asha's mind raced. This was insane. She couldn't believe it. Was this stranger telling the truth? Could he really pay off her family's debt? Could she really escape this nightmare? The idea was too good to be true. Rajan hesitated, glancing at Asha, who was too stunned to speak. He could see the conflict in her eyes, the desperate hope that was beginning to bloom. But it was more than that. There was something else. Asha didn't belong in this world of arranged marriages and family debts. Rajan knew that now, but he wasn't sure if he was willing to part with the money. Why would you do this? Rajan asked, his voice laced with suspicion. What do you get out of it? The stranger didn't flinch. Nothing. I'm not here for profit. I'm here to give her a choice. Something she hasn't had in her life. Asha's breath caught in her throat. A choice. A real choice. Rajan studied the stranger for a long moment. The weight of the situation pressed down on him. He had made this arrangement to save his family. But now, a part of him was questioning if this was truly the right thing. Still, the promise of settling his debts, of freeing himself from the pressure that had been suffocating him for so long, was hard to resist. Asha looked at Rajan, her voice barely a whisper. Please, let me go. It was the first time she had spoken since they had started their journey, and her words cut through the heavy silence in the carriage like a knife. Rajan turned to her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, but then it was gone. With a reluctant nod, he turned back to the stranger. Fine, take her. Asha couldn't believe what she was hearing. She felt like her heart might burst from the sudden rush of emotions. Freedom, escape, hope. All of it was within her reach. The stranger stepped back, opening the carriage door fully. He offered her his hand, and without a second thought, Asha took it. Her fingers trembled as she stepped out into the cold night, the mist swirling round her. As she looked back at the carriage, she saw Rajan watching her, his face a mix of anger and resignation. But Asha didn't care. She was free. The stranger led her away, and as they walked into the unknown, Asha couldn't help but feel a strange sense of peace. For the first time in a long time, she was in control of her own destiny. The past was behind her, and the future was hers to create. But even as she walked forward, she knew that the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still many obstacles to overcome, and the world was full of dangers she had yet to face. But with the stranger by her side, she knew she wasn't alone. The road ahead was uncertain, but Asha had made her choice. And for the first time, it was a choice that was entirely her own. The escape plan, the night air was crisp, cool against Asha's skin as she walked alongside the stranger. The mist swirled around them, wrapping them in a thick, ghostly fog. The world felt distant, almost like it wasn't real. Asha's footsteps were light, but her mind was heavy with thoughts and questions she didn't know how to answer. She had just escaped a life she didn't want, but what now? Where was she going? Who was this man who had freed her? And most importantly, could she trust him? The stranger, whose name she had yet to learn, walked beside her in silence, his stride purposeful and steady. His face remained hidden beneath the shadow of his hood, but she could tell from his posture that he was focused, determined. He didn't seem like the kind of person to make promises lightly, yet everything about him felt unfamiliar. She knew nothing about him, yet here she was, walking with him into an uncertain future. "Where are we going?" Asha finally asked, her voice quiet but steady. The stranger glanced at her briefly, his eyes hidden in the darkness. "To a place where you'll be safe," he replied, his voice calm and reassuring. "But we need to move quickly." Asha's heart skipped a beat. Safe, that was what she had longed for, but the word felt almost foreign to her. She had always been bound by the rules of her family, by the customs and expectations that had been placed upon her. Now, for the first time, she was free to choose her path, and yet she had no idea where to start. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her curiosity getting the better of her. "You don't even know me." The stranger didn't answer right away. He continued walking, his gaze focused on the path ahead. The only sounds were the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional rustle of the trees in the breeze. "I've seen too many people like you," he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. "People who are forced into lives they didn't choose. People who have no way out. I can't stand by and do nothing." His words struck Asha deep in her chest. For the first time, someone had shown her compassion without asking for anything. In return, her thoughts swirled. What did he mean by too many people like you? Did he help others like her? Was he some kind of rebel or vigilante? She wanted to ask more, to learn about the man who had saved her. But something in his expression told her that now was not the time. They continued walking in silence, the mist thickening around them as they neared the edge of a small forest. Asha felt her heart race as they drew closer to what appeared to be a hidden camp, small tents set up in a secluded area, away from the prying eyes of the village. The camp was silent, the only movement coming from the low flicker of a fire in the center. Asha stopped for a moment, her eyes scanning the surrounding. She hadn't expected to be brought to a camp like this, far away from civilization. It was peaceful, isolated, but also unsafe. She wasn't sure yet. What if the people here weren't who they seemed to be? What if they meant her harm? The stranger noticed her hesitation and turned to her. "Don't worry," he said, sensing her unease. "You're safe here." He led her toward the campfire, where a few figures sat huddled together. Asha felt a rush of nervousness and excitement. This was it. She was away from her family, away from the man she was supposed to marry. But was she truly free? Or was she stepping into another trap? The stranger introduced her to the group, small band of people who, like him, had dedicated themselves to helping others who were oppressed or forced into unwanted situations. They were a motley crew, each with their own story of hardship and survival. Asha noticed that many of them had the same look in their eyes, a mix of pain and determination, like they had all faced their own demons and come out stronger. One woman, a tall, broad-shouldered figure with fiery red hair, stood up to greet Asha. Her eyes were kind, but there was a steely resolve in her gaze. "You must be Asha," she said, her voice warm but firm. "We've heard about you. Don't worry, you're safe here." Asha nodded, but didn't speak. She was still processing everything that had happened. She had just been freed from a life she didn't want, but now there was a new life ahead of her, one she had to navigate without any guidance. She felt a wave of uncertainty wash over her. She was grateful, yes, but she also felt lost. We don't have much, but we can offer you a chance, the red-haired woman continued, sensing Asha's hesitation. A chance to live freely, to choose your own future. But it won't be easy. The world doesn't like people who go against the system. Asha swallowed hard. I don't know if I'm ready for all this. The woman smiled softly. None of us are, but you'll have people here who will help you. We all need to stick together. The stranger, who had remained silent during the conversation, finally spoke. We'll need to lay low for a while. People from your old life will be looking for you, but we'll figure it out together. And when the time is right, we'll strike. Asha looked at him, her heart racing. Strike? What do you mean? He glanced at her briefly, then turned his attention back to the campfire. There's always a way to fight back, to take control of your life. But first, we need to be patient. Patience. That was the last thing Asha had. She had spent her whole life waiting for something to change, for something to happen. But now she had to choose how to make that change happen. As the night wore on, Asha sat by the fire with the others, her mind racing with thoughts of what came next. She had escaped, yes, but the road ahead was still unclear. What would she do now? How would she fit into this new world? But one thing was certain. She had chosen to take control of her future, and for the first time in her life, that was enough. The escape had only just begun. The pursuit days that followed were filled with quiet tension. Asha had never experienced anything like it. The camp, though hidden deep in the woods, was not free from danger. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig underfoot, made her heart race. The group, including the stranger whose name she still didn't know, moved with a purpose, always aware of their surroundings. They knew the risks they faced. Her escape had not gone unnoticed, and word would spread quickly. Someone would come for her, and when they did, they would bring everything they had to drag her back. Asha tried to push the fear away, but it lingered, settling in the pit of her stomach. It was only a matter of time before they would be found. The stranger, whose eyes never seemed to leave the horizon, had become her constant companion. Despite his silent demeanor, Asha couldn't help but feel a connection to him, an unspoken bond forged in the chaos of her escape. She had so many questions, but she never asked them. There was a sense that now wasn't the time for them. One evening, as dusk began to fall, the group gathered around the campfire. The crackling of the flames seemed louder than usual, and Asha found herself watching the flames dance, her thoughts scattered. What happens if they find us? Asha finally asked, breaking the silence that had hung over the group for hours. The red-haired woman, who had introduced herself as Kira, glanced at the stranger, then at Asha. They'll come for you, she said simply, but we'll be ready. Asha felt a shiver run down her spine. How do you know? We've been on the run before, Kira answered, her voice low but resolute. There are people who don't want us to exist, people who are used to controlling others, people like your family's debtors. We've escaped them before. We'll do it again. Asha didn't fully understand, but the determination in Kira's voice left little room for doubt. They had been through this before. She had been taught to fear the world outside her small village, but now she was learning that there was more to fear than just her family's obligations. The stranger, who had been silent up until now, spoke up. His voice was calm, but it carried a weight that made everyone fall silent. They won't stop. Not until they have you back, he said, his eyes scanning the trees around them. But we won't make it easy for them. We'll keep moving, stay one step ahead. Asha turned toward him, her heart pounding in her chest. What do you mean? What are we going to do? The stranger looked at her, his face softening just slightly. We're going to make sure you have a life of your own. We're going to protect you from the people who think they can control you. The warmth from the fire seemed to flicker, casting shadows across their faces. The group looked to the stranger for confirmation, waiting for his next words, and when they came, they were more chilling than Asha had anticipated. We strike at dawn. The next morning came too quickly. Asha had barely slept, her mind racing with thoughts of what was about to happen. They were on the move before the sun had even risen. The air was still cool, and the sky was painted with streaks of pink and orange as they hurried through the trees. Every step felt like it could be their last. But the group moved with precision, their footsteps light and swift. Guided by the stranger's sharp instincts, they had learned that the people from Asha's village, the men who had been part of the agreement, were close. Too close. It was time to act. As they approached the edge of a dense forest, the stranger stopped and signaled for the others to halt. He motioned for Asha to come closer, his eyes narrowed in thought. "Asha," he said quietly, his voice firm, but kind, "this is your moment. You need to decide what kind of life you want." Asha felt a lump form in her throat. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words caught in her chest. The truth was, she was scared. She had never had the luxury of making her own choices before. She had always been told what to do, what was expected of her. Now, she was being asked to decide her own future, and it terrified her. "I don't know if I can," she whispered, her eyes downcast. "I've never been the one to make decisions." The stranger placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch surprisingly gentle. "You're not alone in this. We're with you, all of us. But if you want to truly live, you have to step forward and claim it. There's no going back." Asha nodded slowly, feeling the weight of his words settle in her chest. She had already taken the first step when she left her home, when she chose to escape the life that had been thrust upon her. But now, the true test lay ahead. The choice was hers. "Are you ready?" the stranger asked softly. Asha took a deep breath, her heart still racing. She didn't know if she was ready, but she had no other choice. The life she had left behind was gone, and in its place, a new world awaited, a world of uncertainty, yes, but also one of possibility. She had to take that first step. She had to decide. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but steady, "I'm ready." The stranger gave her a small, approving nod before signaling for the group to move forward. They were no longer running, they were fighting back. This was her chance, her moment to choose a future of her own. The pursuit was on. The days that followed were a blur of movement and tension. The group had grown closer as they moved deeper into the forest, constantly shifting their camp and staying ahead of the pursuers. Asha's heart remained heavy, but with each passing moment, something inside her began to shift. She was no longer the girl who had been forced into an unwanted marriage, weighed down by family debts and obligations. She was becoming someone else, a woman who had a choice. But that choice came with its own set of challenges. The further they went, the more Asha realized she didn't know much about the stranger who had rescued her, the man who had shown her kindness when the world seemed to have forgotten her. He had given her freedom, but she still didn't understand why. Why had he taken such an interest in her life? Why had he been willing to help her escape? One evening, as the group settled around the campfire, Asha could no longer keep her questions bottled up. She had to know more. The stranger whose name she had just learned was Kayla had been distant, always watching, always calculating. But tonight, there was a flicker of something else in his eyes, a vulnerability that she had never seen before. She waited until the others were busy with their tasks, and then, taking a deep breath, she walked over to where Cale sat, his back turned to her, staring into the flickering flames. "Cale," she began softly, her voice hesitant, "I need to ask you something." Cale didn't turn immediately, but his body tensed as if he had been expecting this question. After a long pause, he spoke, his voice low and steady. "Go ahead." Asha sat beside him, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't shake the feeling that this conversation was going to change everything. "Why did you help me?" she asked, her eyes searching his face. "I don't even know you. You don't owe me anything. Why risk your life, your safety, for someone like me?" Cale finally turned to face her, his dark eyes meeting hers. There was a flicker of something pain, regret, perhaps even guilt, but it was gone before Asha could be sure. "It's not just you, Asha," he said, his voice quiet but intense. "I didn't just save you because of who you are. I helped you because I couldn't let you become another victim. I've seen what happens when people are forced into lives they don't want. I've seen the consequences of those choices. I couldn't let that happen to you." Asha's brows furrowed, her confusion deepening. "What do you mean?" Cale sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. The lines of his expression softened, but there was a weight in his eyes that told her there was more to this story than she realized. "I was once in a position like yours," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I grew up in a family that made choices for me. My future wasn't mine to decide. I was sold. My family needed money, and the only way out was for me to marry a woman I didn't love, to become someone I didn't want to be." Asha's eyes widened in surprise. She had never imagined that Cale, the man who had shown her compassion and strength, could have gone through something similar. "Like me?" she asked, her voice soft with the weight of understanding. Cale nodded. "Yes, but my situation was different. I was forced into a marriage that wasn't about love or family. It was about power, about control, and it destroyed me. The woman I was supposed to marry, she was forced into it too, but we both escaped. We found each other, and we made our own way, but not before the people who had controlled our lives destroyed everything." Asha felt her heart tighten. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "What happened?" she asked, leaning in slightly, wanting to hear the rest of the story. Cale's expression darkened, the flicker of pain returning to his eyes. "We escaped, yes, but there were consequences. People don't let you go that easily. The ones who control your life don't just let you walk away without a fight. They'll come after you. They'll destroy everything you've built, everything you've worked for, just to keep you in your place." Asha could hear the rawness in his voice, the scars that still lingered beneath the surface. She understood now, more than ever, that Cale wasn't just helping her for some noble cause. He was helping her because he understood what it was like to be trapped, to feel like there was no way out. "I didn't want to see anyone else go through that," Cale continued, his voice softening as he looked into Asha's eyes. "I couldn't bear the thought of someone else being controlled, being forced into a life they didn't choose. And when I saw you, when I saw how scared you were, how resigned to your fate, I couldn't just stand by." Asha felt her heart swell with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. She had never imagined that the man who had come to her rescue could be carrying such a heavy burden of his own. He had fought for his freedom, just as she was now fighting for hers. She felt an unspoken connection between them, a bond that was forged not only through their shared struggles, but also through the understanding that neither of them would ever let someone else control their fate. "I didn't ask for any of this," Asha whispered, her voice shaky. "I didn't ask to be born into a family with debts, to be sold like an object. But now I don't know what to do." Kale reached over, placing a hand gently on hers. "You don't have to have all the answers right now," he said. Softly, "What matters is that you're free. And that's more than most people ever get." Asha looked up at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I don't know where this road will lead, but thank you. Thank you for showing me there's a way out, for giving me a choice." Kale smiled faintly, his eyes softening. "You're stronger than you think, Asha, and no matter what happens next, you don't have to face it alone." As they sat together in the quiet, the flickering light of the campfire casting long shadows, Asha realized that her journey wasn't over. It was only just beginning. She had a choice now. She had the freedom to decide who she wanted to be. And no one, no matter how powerful, could take that away from her. The past was behind her, but the future was hers to create. And with Kale by her side, she knew she wasn't walking this road alone. The final choice, the days stretched on, and Asha's mind became a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. The camp had become her new reality, a life filled with uncertainty, but also with possibility. The escape from her past had opened doors she never thought she'd find, and with each passing day, she grew stronger. The stranger, Kale, had given her a gift, her freedom, but now she had to decide what to do with it. She had come so far, but the road ahead was still clouded with doubt. She had seen the strength in Kale's eyes, the way he carried the weight of his own past, and yet he was determined to protect her, to guide her toward a future of her own choosing. And as much as she wanted to believe that she could face whatever was coming next, she couldn't shake the fear that lurked just beneath the surface. One afternoon, as the group prepared to move camp once again, Kale pulled Asha aside. His expression was serious, his eyes dark with thought. There was an urgency in his voice as he spoke. "Asha, I need to talk to you," he said quietly, his hand resting on her shoulder. "We can't keep running forever. The people after us, they won't stop. It's only a matter of time before they catch up." Asha felt a chill run down her spine at his words. She had known it was coming, but hearing it aloud made it all too real. They had been hiding, moving from place to place, staying ahead of their pursuers. But how much longer? Could they outrun the inevitable? "What do we do now?" Asha asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest. "How do we stop them?" Kale's eyes met hers, and for the first time, Asha saw a flicker of something else in his gaze, something deeper, a vulnerability that he had kept hidden. He took a deep breath before speaking again. "There's only one way to stop them. We have to face them, head on." Asha's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean, you want to fight them?" Kale nodded, his expression resolute. "Yes, we can't keep running forever. We have to take control of this situation, Asha. If we don't stand up now, we'll always be looking over our shoulders, always running. You deserve more than that. You deserve to live without fear." Asha's mind raced. The thought of confrontation terrified her, but the more she thought about it, the more she realized that Kale was right. She had been running for so long, from her family's debt, from the life that had been forced upon her, from the people who had tried to control her. But now she had a chance to take back control. The only question was, could she do it? Do you really think we can win? Asha asked, her voice trembling. Kale's gaze softened as he looked at her, his hand gently squeezing hers. I don't know, but I do know that we can't let fear control us anymore. You have the power to make a choice, Asha, and that choice, whatever you decide, it's yours. No one else's. Asha stood there, feeling the weight of his words settle in her chest. She had spent so much of her life being controlled by others, by circumstances beyond her control. But now she had a chance to change everything. The future was hers to decide. I'm scared, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't know if I'm strong enough. Kale smiled faintly, a warmth in his eyes. You are. I've seen you grow stronger every day. You've already faced more than most people ever will, and you're still here. That takes strength. That takes courage. Asha looked out at the horizon, her mind swirling with the possibilities. She had come so far, and yet it felt like she was at a crossroads. She could choose to keep running, to hide from the life that had been forced on her, or she could choose to face it, to fight for the future she wanted. The choice was hers. With a deep breath, Asha turned to Kale, her eyes filled with determination. I'm ready. Let's face them. Kale's face softened with approval. We'll face them together. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. The night before their confrontation, Asha couldn't sleep. Her mind was filled with images of the life she had left behind, of the people who had tried to control her. She thought of her family, the debt that had weighed so heavily on them, and the man she had been promised to. She had never had a choice in her life before, but now everything had changed. The weight of her decision pressed down on her like 1,000 pounds, but deep down, she knew it was the right choice. When the first light of dawn broke through the trees, Asha stood up, her body tense with anticipation. She had made her decision. There was no turning back now. The group gathered, their things, preparing for what lay ahead. They had a plan, and they were ready to face whatever came their way. As they made their way toward the village, Asha felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, she felt in control. She was no longer a pawn in someone else's game. She was the one making the choices. They reached the outskirts of the village, just as the sun began to rise higher in the sky. The air was thick with tension, the quiet before the storm. Asha looked around, her heart racing, but she didn't feel fear. Not anymore. She had already faced her biggest fear, the fear of losing control, and now she was ready to fight for the life she deserved. As they approached the village, the group braced themselves for what was to come. But Asha knew one thing for sure. No matter what happened next, she was ready. The final choice had been made. The battle for her future had begun. The new beginning. The tension in the air was palpable as the group approached the village. The sun, now fully risen, cast its harsh light on the dusty road ahead. Every step Asha took felt heavier than the last, but with each step, she also felt a growing sense of purpose. The fear that had once gripped her heart was now replaced with something stronger. Resolve. Kale walked beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. His expression was focused, but there was a hint of something softer in his eyes. When he glanced at her, perhaps, or something akin to affection, Asha had come to trust him in ways she never thought possible. He had given her the strength to make this choice, to face the future head-on. As they reached the outskirts of the village, Asha's heart beat faster. She could see figures moving in the distance, people from her past, people who had once controlled her life. The men who had arranged her marriage, the ones who had sold her future for a few coins, they were here, waiting. But this time, things were different. This time, Asha was not the girl they could manipulate. She was a woman who had made her own choice, a woman who was ready to take back her life. The group stopped just before entering the village, and Kale turned to Asha, his eyes locked with hers. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice calm, but carrying a weight that only she could understand. Asha nodded, her throat tight. "I'm ready." With a final glance, Kale nodded to the group, signaling that it was time. They moved forward, each step bringing them closer to the confrontation that would change everything. As they entered the village, Asha's eyes scanned the familiar surroundings, the narrow streets, the old houses, the place she had grown up. In it, all felt so distant now, as if she were seeing it through a fog. The life she had once known seemed almost like a dream, something from another time. She was no longer that girl. Ahead, a small group of men stood waiting. Asha recognized them immediately, the men who had forced her into this situation. Their faces were cold, their eyes hard. But there was something else there, something she hadn't expected to see: fear. They had underestimated her. They had thought she was weak, that she would bow to their will. But now, she was standing in front of them, strong, determined, and unafraid. Rajan, the man who had arranged her marriage, stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he saw her. His gaze flickered to Kale and the others, but he quickly returned to Asha. "You," he spat, his voice thick with anger. "You think you can just run away from your responsibilities? You think you can escape your fate?" Asha stood tall, her gaze unwavering. "I'm not running from anything," she said, her voice steady. "I'm choosing my own future. I'm choosing my own life." Rojan's face twisted in fury, but Asha didn't flinch. She was no longer afraid of him, of what he could do, or of the life he had tried to force on her. This was her moment, and nothing could take that away. Kale stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "She's made her choice, Rajan, and you're not going to change it. No one controls her anymore." The tension in the air thickened as the men around Rajan shifted uneasily. They had come expecting to force Asha back into her old life, but now they were faced with something they hadn't planned for: resistance, real resistance. Rajan glared at Kale. "You think you can stop us? You think you can just take her and walk away?" "I'm not just taking her," Kale replied. "I'm helping her take back what's hers, her life, her future." For a moment, there was silence. The weight of Kale's words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Rajan seemed to falter, his expression darkening. But then he sneered. "You think she'll be free? You're just a fool, like the rest of them." Asha's heart raced as she stepped forward, her voice rising. "No, Rajan, I'm not a fool anymore, and I won't be a pawn in your game. This is my life, and I'm going to live it on my terms. You don't own me, no one does." The words echoed in the village square, and for the first time in her life, Asha felt the weight of her own power. The power to choose, the power to live. Rajan took a step back, his face twisting in anger and disbelief. But the fear was still there, lurking beneath his fury. He had never expected Asha to stand up to him, to fight for her freedom. Asha stood, her ground, her chest rising and falling with each breath. She wasn't just standing up to him. She was standing up for herself. She was taking back what had always been hers, her life, her future, her choice. "You're free," Kale said. Softly, his voice steady, and for the first time, Asha realized that he wasn't just talking to her. He was talking to the world that had tried to control them both. "We're all free." The men around Rajan shifted uneasily, but no one moved. Asha's heart pounded in her chest as she took one last look at the life she had left behind. It was time to walk away. It was time to step into the future, into the unknown. Without a word, Asha turned, her eyes meeting Kale's. Together, they walked away from the village, from her past, from everything that had held her down. And for the first time, Asha felt truly free. The future was hers, and it was waiting for her. As they disappeared into the horizon, Asha knew that no matter what came next, she would face it with strength, courage, and the unwavering belief that her choices, her life belonged to her and no one else. And that, she realized, was only the beginning.